Hi, Justina.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Excellent. I'm so glad to have you on here to chat about some all things movement practice and life and meridians. So
Likewise.
yeah, I wanted to just ask a little bit about your background for the listeners, and so we can learn a little bit about your path, your history, and what brought you to this moment in your life. So I mean, that's a small order to answer that question, right?
I'm like, do we have a prompt or you want me to
Yeah,
just
yeah. No, I'll
pick
give you a
from the
prompt.
past?
So tell me about how your movement practice path started.
Yeah, I love that question. I spent a lot of time disconnected from my body, like in my younger years. And it wasn't until, unfortunately, I was involved in an accident while on my bike, that I started to lean into body modalities, chiropractic, massage. And when I was in those sessions, they would tell me like what they're working on, particularly the massage therapist, what muscles he's working, what they do, why he's working them. And I was just like, at the time I was 18, and I was like, what? Like, we can actually know this information? Like, why is this information not a part of standardized education? Because there's so much going on in here that I had no idea was even a thing. And so that sparked the interest, and eventually led me to going to massage therapy school. And so when I went to massage therapy school, it was more of like a, hey, let's see where this takes me. Like, I don't know, there's a lot of different umbrellas and different paths in the massage therapy world. And so I was like, this could take me in any direction. I'm not sure if it's more energetic work. I'm not sure if it's more physical work, like muscle work. And so once I was in the program, I became really, really fascinated by how the body moves in space and how the muscles work together to create movement. And not only that, but even on a more subtle level and a more nervous system and emotional level, but like, how is our lived experience stored in our tissues? And that's something that, honestly, at first when I was learning about it in school, I was like, there's no way that's real. Like, how can our memories be encoded in our musculature while at the same time, like, trying to learn about all of these muscles and actions and what they do and how they work and move and where they're located. And it wasn't until I had a personal experience with, like, a memory flashback during a bodywork session that I put those pieces together. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot more happening here than just working a muscle from tendon to tendon. Like, there is actual memory, there's information, and there's depth here. And so while I was in bodywork school, that's when I started to get into yoga. Actually, even in the year leading up to going to school, I started getting into yoga when I lived in Chicago, and finding a movement practice. I knew, like, that's something that I want to sprinkle into this. Right now, I'm focused on massage therapy school, but I know that I want to add this to my toolbox. I know that I want to dig into this a little bit deeper and connect and bridge the structure and function with like movement and functionality. Um, and so, just to circle back on what you asked, we're getting into how my movement practice is tied
Mm-hmm.
into today. Okay,
Yeah,
I just want to
yeah.
make sure I'm not derailing because sometimes I
No,
can
no,
go
it's
off.
perfect.
Okay. So yeah, and then massage therapy school, went through that. Once I got settled into my practice and started building my practice and working in different types of settings, performing body work in different types of settings, like things like chiropractic offices, PT clinics. One of the most impactful was working at a facility that worked with folks that were victims of physical trauma.
Mm.
And so that, of course, was very insightful. And this is sort of where I got an idea of like how I want to build my personal practice. And so a couple years into that, I started working on my own to do that. But at the same time, I was starting to develop a regular yoga practice on my own. And at this time now, I'm back in Detroit, and there's not a lot of yoga at the time, and still not a ton, but not a lot of yoga studios, not a lot of access to yoga. A lot of that is in the outskirts of the city, which I didn't make my way out there too often. But a place opened up. I was able to get into my practice. I was able to start my certification. And a lot of like the lineage of the first teacher training I took was based in Ashtanga. And
Mm.
so that's a lot of what created the foundation of what I practice, what I teach. Mostly what I teach now. Honestly, my practice is a little bit more stripped down and simplified and nervous system regulating these days, whereas the Ashtanga can be a little bit more on the fiery side. But yeah, that was like the integration of movement. And then I think for a while, honestly, I was like compartmentalizing my bodywork practice with my yoga practice, and then eventually teaching yoga. I was like, okay, this is me teaching yoga, this is me doing body work. And it wasn't until like the last, I'd say 5 years, that I'm finally like intersecting, like, wait, there's like a connection. This is body work. Teaching yoga is body work, but it's
Mhm.
rather than the person that's receiving the body work being passive and receiving in a passive way, it's an active, engaged body work session. It's more of a duality. It's more of all parties are involved in facilitating change in the body. And so recently it's been a lot of fun to bring those two really impactful practices into one class, into one-on-one, into one training. And so that's why I'm really excited about this one.
Oh, excellent. Yes. And to piggyback on that last thing you just said, I loved how, kind of at first you're wearing these different hats, like, gee, the yoga teacher and the massage therapist are separate. And now you see them more integrated. I'm wondering, how does the yoga go into the massage, and how does the massage go into the yoga? Or we'll just call it body work as a general, I think. Oh, well, I mean, I don't know if I want to just label body work as massage, because you're kind of saying there's an integration, that they're both body work. Um, they're both body work techniques, right? To help people find a sense of embodiment.
Hmm.
So how does one specifically feed into the other?
Yeah. So when I'm in a bodywork session, and I kind of joke with folks that I work with, I'm like, this is not your spa relaxation massage. Like, we're getting into the tissues, and we've got a goal here. Besides relaxation, which ultimately happens just because we love being touched and held. But the goal is structural. The goal might be nervous system. The goal might be postural, might be pain related. But the session that I'm in with folks one-on-one is very focused, not just like, here I am treating the muscle, but it's like I'm educating you on like what I'm doing and why, like there's an intention, and with that intention, we can really create an impact in the body. And I want folks to leave our session feeling empowered and like they know their body more, like how I felt when I was first receiving body work, and with tools that they can then take home. So that's often where like homework slash yoga comes into play in the bodywork session, so that folks don't feel like they have to see me in order to feel good in their body. Like, I want you to have the tools to self-regulate, to um, regulate the conditions inside of your body without feeling like you have to call someone else to do it. Like, that's what makes the body work more empowering, and sufficient, self-sufficient, and sustainable as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and like how I see also yoga practice, and why kind of I like some of the theories like Katona yoga too, because it sort of
Hmm.
empowers the practitioner with tools that they can use beyond the mat, right? The body
Hmm.
mapping, the sort of figuring out the context of how, these pieces of our bodies work together, instead of like, oh, I have a tight shoulder, let me get that knot massaged out, and then I'm going to walk out and go about my day, and then when it gets tight again, I'll come back, right? So it's not just like these pieces of our bodies that are tight. It's like if there's tightness somewhere, then that can really give us information about our whole body, and not only our whole body, but our past or memories. And there's
Hmm.
a lot of overlap, and we can learn a lot from, I think, that experience of yoga. And I'm not a massage therapist. I love getting massages, but I love the idea. There are people who don't. In fact,
There are people who don't.
one of my best friends um went to school and was a massage therapist, but for like 5 seconds, because she was like, I went to massage therapy school, but I don't like touching people.
Oh my gosh, you gotta be okay with
Yeah, so
it.
she moved more towards yoga and
Mhm,
Pilates and, and but she really valued the education that she learned in massage
mhm,
therapy school. And really she did it when she was very young and was sort of searching for, I think something to do and
mhm,
wanted to work in these modalities and kind of sometimes figuring that out, I think is trial and error. And
mhm.
there's a lot of, methods and theories that I've tried out that including Ashtanga that I don't really use as much, although I love the idea of the practice perhaps more than the practice these days,
I
like
concur.
I'm like, oh, okay. I think I tried the primary series a couple years ago. I did a video of Patabi Joyce and I mostly the intent was to do it,
Mhm.
but half the time I was like watching that and I'm like, wow, I don't think I can do that.
It's like, wow, yeah, I really did that when I was 24. It was
Right.
great.
Right. That's what I was like,
Now it's
wow.
a decade later,
Yeah, it's like,
we're working with what we
okay,
got.
okay. And it's okay. Like there's so many different great techniques that we can all like celebrate that other people find value from and like also
Mhm,
then cherish the value we found from them, but also know when to step away and find different systems of information that serve us where we are
mhm,
in the moment that we're
mhm.
in, which I feel like is constantly changing.
It's
Um,
always changing.
always
And
that's
to piggyback a little bit, if you don't mind, off of
yeah.
like you talking about sort of like and this was like a few points back, so I'm trying to piece it back clearly, but the compartmentalization of the body that we can oftentimes find here, whether that's in like body work, or you were drawing the line of it being within the realm of yoga, but that's something in body work that um, was more my approach for a while, being like more of a myofascial release therapist. I would address like when you're doing myofascial release, you're working tendon to tendon along the entire muscle belly. And so that would compartmentalize my way of thinking of like, okay, now I'm working gastrocnemius, now I'm working glute maximus. But there wasn't like that integration where you said is the beautiful thing with Katona yoga, for example, because we're threading that integration and piecing um, parts of the self together. And that's the beautiful thing about meridians, because that ties us into what the work that we'll be doing in this training is that the myofascial meridian lines, the work of the meridian lines is to connect, it describes how the muscles connect with each other throughout the body from head to toe. And so now that's something that I've not only integrated in my bodywork practice, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to work just your gastrocnemius calf muscle because you may have tightness there or tension there, but I'm going to work along the entire back line because, hey, maybe your calf has an injury and it's causing tension headaches at the base of your skull because they're connected along that myofascial meridian line. And the same goes now with the way that I teach yoga. It's not like compartmentalized in the sense that I think is pretty common for folks coming out of training of like, here's me saying the information that I was given, or like, here's me describing how to get into this shape. But it's like, what is the purpose of the shape? Like, what is it actually doing for the body, mind, breath? And that's where the meridian lines come in handy with the yoga practice because we're not getting into a warrior one, for example, for the sake of being in a warrior one, but it's like we want to address maybe the back leg psoas, which runs along the deep front line, and with the intention of addressing what's happening in the deep abdominal trunk. And so I think that that the point that you made really threads in the work that we're doing in this training. So I wanted to make sure to point that out.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so now I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So for listeners, just to get used to the vocabulary, what is a meridian?
Yeah. So, especially if you've been studying Katona yoga theory or any traditional Chinese medicine, you may have heard the word be sprinkled around a little bit more through the lens of Eastern techniques. And so, what's really fascinating is like they run along the same pathways. So, in Eastern techniques, meridian lines are organ pathways that run throughout the body. And so, in something like acupuncture, they're addressed, they're treated to regulate the body in a certain way, more systemically, usually more subtle body, systemically cellular. And now with the myofascial meridian lines, it's really fascinating because they most of them run along the same pathway as those organ meridian lines, but they're how muscles connect with each other. So it starts with fascia, and it's a really strong, dense connective tissue that runs head to toe throughout the body. It surrounds and binds every single one of our muscles, every single muscle fiber, every organ, even our bones. And the fascia, even on a more superficial level, is just underneath the skin. So it's when we pull our skin, like the back of the hand, what snaps it back is fascia. It literally surrounds and binds us from head to toe. And so if we were to experience trauma, if we were to experience an injury, or if we have a compensation pattern due to how we use our bodies, whether it's what we do for hobby or work, then the entire myofascial meridian will be affected by that deviation in the body. So it's, again, looking more holistically at the body, three-dimensionally at the body, of like, okay, perhaps you sprained your ankle, and in which way is that affecting, like, say you sprained your left ankle, in which way is that affecting your right hip? Because that is where we then target the spiral line. And so that is primarily the work that I do in both body work and in the yoga practice, is like really, really, really slowing down the practice, particular to yoga now, slowing down the practice, holding the poses, so we can tap into the sensation of creating elasticity in those fascial meridian lines. And it requires really strong somatic awareness. So we're going to start with like really, really quiet, deep, inside inquiry, because with that, then we can start to feel what's happening in the body more so. But if to show you like a visual example of the meridian lines, here's the back line, superficial back line. So in Katona yoga, right, we're working in the winter, we're working on the back body, we're looking at the kidneys, and the line of the kidneys runs almost exactly the same as the line of the superficial back line. Wow. And so this is the work of Tom Myers. Okay. Really, based in Maine. So you're not too far from his center. No. He does online trainings, he does cadaver labs, and he does certification programs for structural integration based off of Ida Rolf's method of Rolfing. And so, yeah, that, for example, how I would bring this into the bodywork practice is if someone complains of headaches, maybe at the base of the skull, then I'm going to work all along the length of the spine. I'm going to work into the erector spinae group, sacrotuberous ligament, hamstrings, gastrocnemius, Achilles tendon, ankle, bottom of the feet. So maybe someone has plantar fasciitis. It's likely that they're also feeling it in their sacrotuberous ligament. It's likely that they have issues maybe in splenius capitis here in the back of the neck. The way that I would apply this into the yoga practice, usually I'll teach seasonally, because that's what we do in Katona. So this is going to be winter practices, right? So we're going to do those deep folds, we're going to do those plows. And what I'll do sometimes is I'll start foot to the base of the skull. So if I know I want to get into like a plow pose, like really, really like long holding fold, and we're usually tight in our bodies, especially in the winter. Yeah. I'll start with feet first, or I'll start with head first and work my way down the entire meridian line. And so most recently I've been leading, I did recently at a festival that I was facilitating, a music, arts, and activism festival, guided self-massage. And so that's also something to bring into the practice of teaching and educating people about their bodies, is like self-massage along these meridian lines, or like, hey, we can't quite reach the erector spinae back there, but we can work the ankle and still create change in the rest of that chain.
With so that's like the winter line, right? And then what's are there 4 different lines for different seasons, or?
I love that question. So there's a lot, and we won't be doing all of them because there are some really deep meridian lines. Like, for example, let me see if I can find, let's look at the deep front line, for example. Well, the ones that we'll focus on. Oh, cool. Sorry. Line. Yeah, superficial back line, superficial front line, and the spiral line. Ooh. Yeah. Let me show you the spiral line. This one's really fun. Did I say spiral line, or we have 4 days, right? Because I thought, let me just double check.
4 days.
Because I know I couldn't decide between spiral line and lateral line. The lateral line will be side body. That'll be more of superficial front line and back bend, superficial back line and forward bends, the spiral line and twists. Yes. Just want to make sure I'm staying on topic.
That's totally fine. People will listen to this when the training's over too. So it'll stay up in perpetuity. So that's a spiral line. Fantastic. Yeah, this is fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. A lot of information to work with. What's that?
Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah. So we're looking at the spiral line. We'll have to like get a visual aid for folks that are just on audio somehow. But when you look at the spiral line, for example, here's an example that I use in bodywork practice. Someone comes in with like a winged scapula. And so that's the scapula is coming off of the back body. It's winged out to the side, often due to instability in the shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint of the shoulder, and instability of this they call it a false joint because it's not bone to bone, that there's muscle between the scapula and the ribs. And what's underneath it is the serratus anterior. So when the serratus anterior is tight, it pulls the shoulder blade forward. So it wings that scapula. And so you can see how it wraps. This is we're looking at the body from the back. And so it wraps from serratus anterior across the front of the trunk. And then it's going to hit TFL, which is short for tensor fascia lata, which is the muscle that turns into the IT band. And the IT band crosses the knee joint. And so if someone has a winged scapula in the right shoulder, I'm going to look at their left knee and see what's going on there. And so that's body work. That's like, hey, if you're like, hey, I'm curious about this, we'll make sure you have my contact. We can do like one-on-one consultations and talk about how that relates to you. But as far as like in a group setting with yoga, poses like triangle pose, right? We're looking at working that spiral line because the lower body, we're looking at a internally rotated back leg, and we're stabilizing the feet so that the rotation comes from the trunk. And in the triangle, because one of those poses that's taught differently in different lines of thinking, planes of glass and all of these things, but we want the feet stable. We want that back thigh internally rotated so that when we rotate from the trunk, you might start to feel sensation along your lateral hip, which is exactly where we're working in that spiral line. It wasn't until I felt that sensation shift, or until my feet were placed in the position that's good for this particular alignment, that I felt the experience of Trikonasana in my side body in the lateral hip.
Right. Yeah. It's like, and I mean, it's so in line with how I teach. I love to see it, like, and break it down and see the musculature and just the interconnectedness of it all. And that idea of, the spirals, and really they're almost like counter spirals, like two opposing directions at once to create the, maybe this phrase is too like, rigid, but like, and now I lost the phrase.
You said it's rigid, it's gone.
It's rigid, it's gone. It's too rigid. We'll erase it. It's been
Calling in
erased.
softness here.
But like structural efficiency, like, and to have to work the practice in a way that's structurally efficient. Sometimes I think it's sort of sideline because it seems to be opposed to being free and flowy, and and I think that those two things can exist at the same time with some compromise in both aspects, right? There's anatomical information that I think sometimes can pull us out of the experience of being embodied, and then there's just this idea of like finding the shapes and moving in between them without any sort of knowledge. Let's just like getting a massage, like you were saying, that just kind of palpates the exterior and the piece instead of addressing how that piece is really a reflection of something going on in the whole body. Right. And sometimes like that's what it feels like when you're just yelling out poses and doing them. Right. It's just like, oh, now we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And maybe sometimes there's some meaning giving beyond the poses, but there's not enough of a cohesive theme to bring it together. And I think that there can be a nice relationship between the two worlds, because I think it's important to understand the mechanics of your body, and like at the beginning of our talk, when you talked about your accident and your therapy for that, and really like, why isn't this taught, right? Why isn't this information taught? And there's such, in Western society, a disconnect
Mm-hmm.
between the mind and the body, and also the idea of intelligence not being in embodied practices, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, we're body workers and yoga teachers, like that's not smart work, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And even to bring like a cultural, something that's in the zeitgeist right now, even like the movie Oppenheimer, which is about a scientist who, and all these, like all the quantum physicists were so into Eastern philosophy
Mm-hmm.
because they saw really strong parallels between the science that they were uncovering that was new, and really, really old ancient theories that did not disconnect the
Mm-hmm.
body from the mind so much. I think it's really
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, I love these points that you're making because in Western thought, and like I always preface with like, I'm not knocking Western medicine, like we're
right,
saving lives, we're researching like
right.
the science. I love science, I love evidence, I love data. Don't get me wrong, this is all based on data and evidence. But the westernized way of thinking is like very focused on like the intellectual aspect of it. Like, what am I learning from a book and how can I apply this to what's happening? So the smart comes from the smart and westernized thinking comes from the exterior.
Hmm.
Whereas in Eastern thinking, that this intelligence comes from the inside. And that's like really the goal with these practices that like we're teaching is like how can we tap into that inner intelligence? Because of course we'll utilize those tools as needed, but I encourage maybe that not being the first thing. Like let's look inside first. Only with that information can you create and make an informed choice for your experience. And that's what I really love about the myofascial meridian lines is we're tying in Western techniques with Eastern thought, like
Yeah.
in the way that the technique is applied physically is a little bit more Western, but the way that I'm drawing it into the yoga practice and teaching starts to tie in more Eastern. Okay, like we're going to get the physical body in its place, but in what way can we embody this anatomical shape? What's the experience that we're feeling when we're in it? In what way is the breath in the mind and thought pattern shifting with that? How can we feel the currency move throughout the body and throughout those meridian lines?
Yeah. No, it's really, really interesting stuff. And I feel like people are hungry for learning more about the body, because I think you hit it right on the head. Like everything is information, and nothing necessarily has to be diminished. Like we can use these lines of the musculature to have an insight. We can use the structure of the bones to have an insight. Ultimately, these linear constructs, I think, of asana are there to give us the boundaries and the lines and to really read within the boundary, to kind of color inside the box, explore how things are connected, and then ultimately we form new boundaries. We are able to bend the lines. We are able to, really use the linearity. Not sure if that's a word, but we'll use it today, of the practice to be nonlinear, to have a
Mm-hmm.
nonlinear experience. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
sorry, I just get excited with what you say. This is why I love your classes. I'm like, what? Hold on, let me take notes. I don't have a pen. It's okay, it's recorded. But the linearity also tying that into like just our conditioned way of thinking, and that's something that I like to tie in as well into practice, which is continuous, and into teaching. Especially in this camp out that I was just the Queer Music Arts and Activism Festival where I was. It's like, in what way can we think outside of like this linear, dogmatic, very like this linear way of thinking prevents us, and I'm losing my train of thought here because I got so excited. But this linear way of thinking prevents us from being able to gain more information because we get
Mhm.
stuck on the tracks, like railroad tracks are linear and parallel to each other. And if we're just like going along those same two tracks, we're not looking at the space in between and around, like the scenery that the train is moving through.
Right. No, that's
Yeah.
such a great metaphor. I mean, I love that because like then it could, when the practice becomes so rigid, you know, it's almost like it becomes another thing that you do rather than, you know, a part of you where you have this explorative experience that can be really insightful. And some I think sometimes people use the words insightful and transcendent maybe somewhat interchangeably, you
Hmm.
know, maybe not explicitly, but I think there's an implicit connection there, you know,
Hmm.
because having an insight is like having an aha moment, and then that's like transcending the linear construct, right? You're seeing,
Mm.
here are the two train tracks, and we've, you know, yes, we're going to line ourselves up on them, but yes, let's not forget that we're traveling in a train to get somewhere. We're traveling in a train with windows so that we can look out the windows and explore like the actual joy of getting to point A to point B, not like starting at point A and getting to point B correctly or
Right.
perfectly, you know, it like doing it right. But
Hmm.
it's like it's exploring the lines to, so we see that the lines are underneath life, right?
Hmm.
The structure. It's not the experience, it's the structure.
Hmm.
And the structure gives us information to have the experience.
Mm. Quote yourself on that one. I'm so excited that this is recorded because I'm going to rewatch this because, we get so caught up in like thinking about, say, we're on the train, like, what's the destination and
Yeah,
are we getting there on time?
right,
And just like hyper vigilant on like what we're getting out of it.
right.
And then when we're not getting something out of it, if we're not getting to our destination on time, we're pissed at the captain, And
Right.
it's like we're taking away the experience that we're supposed to be having as humans. We're
Yes.
like, we need to decondition that.
I mean, I'm reading a book now. I'll put in the show notes. It's and I because I can't, the author escapes me. I've just started to read it, and I'm reading it on my Kindle, which I love. I read both off and on the Kindle,
Mhm,
just mainly because I can get books quickly from the library on the Kindle, and it's just like they can travel with it.
mhm.
And but I do remember the titles and the authors less that way. Like it's harder for me to remember 'cause
Yeah.
I don't have that physical thing, but it's time, it's like 4,000 weeks. The title is Time Management for Mortals.
Mm,
And I'm in the beginning, in the introduction, it's talking about how time is just this invented construct, and like even giving us some examples, concrete examples of historically when humans lived before the clock, right? And it's just kind of very interesting. I'm just starting to dig into the surface of this, what I'm going to, kind of get from this book, but I'm like really fascinated and then scared of it at the same time.
I definitely need to dig into that book, and I wish I knew the source, but this is reminding me of something that I read recently about because it was an audiobook, and same thing when it's
Yeah,
on audio, I'm like, "It could have been from anywhere, I don't know."
right.
But it was an audiobook, and it talked about how actually, it's an audiobook on tantra.
Yeah.
And it talked about how, like, time how we rush through things,
Mhm.
and how time there's actually, like, in the language, like, in ancient language he was talking about the author actually, no, the author she was talking about how when she lived in India, the the word for yesterday and tomorrow is the same.
Mm,
And so there's not, like, this obsession with time, like how when she was, like, stuck in a train that was down, like, they had to stop for whatever reason, which, like, if that happened in New York, everybody would be freaking out. Everybody just kinda, like, sat, the children were playing, like, nobody was freaking out, like, their whole perception of time is entirely different. And so in this book particularly, she was drawing
mm,
the lineage of, like, the capitalist, quite frankly, construct of time,
yeah.
and how it, of course, pulls us out of the present moment, but in with the tantra work, she's pulling it into, like, intimacy and how, like, it's something that has become goal-based and that we have rushed through, and in what ways that, like, really slowing down it creates a more powerful and embodied experience, which is literally what we talk about in yoga.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you're bringing that the structure too of our economy has a big play in that. Also in the book that I'm reading, like it's like one of the reasons to start recording time is that the steel magnate was, I think, getting a little, people were taking too many breaks.
Mm.
Yeah, and so they had to start recording the time a little bit more to get more efficiency out of the worker. And then
Wow.
workers are workers, workers aren't people anymore, right? They're just there for the bottom
Workers.
line, right? And it's all just like in every person's body, it's all connected. Like we're all
Hmm.
connected to our economic structures, our communities, the good, the bad, the what we don't want to look at, and what we do want to look at. I think like these practices can really open up the doors to give you the tools to look at everything without running away from it. And I think like if we're going to progress as a society, like this has to be a big part of it. No, it's just
Hmm. And
in
looking at
my
it.
humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Yeah. And the
Yeah,
willingness to look at it and the personal responsibility that comes with that.
yeah. I am so excited for your training. I think we're going
Me
to learn
too.
so much. And I'm excited, like, just that there's so much more beyond this training that we can still learn from you. So like
Hmm.
that it's, it's a beginning and it's an exploration. Before we sign off, I wanted to ask you, is there anything you wanted to mention about the training and any questions that you might think people have um along those lines? And then I'm going to ask you about what you're reading.
Yeah. Questions. It's not just for teachers, but it'll be really valuable if you are. Because I want it to be an invitation to like, okay, so as teachers, we're not just taking in information, ideally, not taking information and regurgitating it. We're applying it to our practice and then defining what that is for us, and then sharing pieces of our personal experience through our voice in the teaching room or in the seat of the teacher. And so that's what this will be for. Practitioner first, then great. If you're a teacher and you want to apply that to your teaching, also wonderful. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of like particular questions. I can't think of anything besides that, but please, if you have any, send me a DM or an
Yeah.
email. Yeah.
And I'll put all that information in the notes here. If you're listening online, you'll have to, if you're listening to the audio version of this, I don't have the paid service yet, so I can't put links in, but you'll on the YouTube uh, page where this will be, you'll have all the books, the book that you were showing us. I'll have the book that I mentioned, the audio book that you mentioned. And also, I want to ask you what you're reading and what is inspiring you right now. And we'll also throw these up in the notes, as well as all your personal information to the website, to how to contact you and all the good stuff, so we can keep the
Yeah.
conversation going.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, as far as like, so I'm like notoriously a person that reads a little bit of something and then, 6 books at once.
Yeah.
But something that's been really cool, that I started and recently picked back up, the Wakeful Body. And so it's somatic mindfulness, somatic resourcefulness, through the lens of Buddhism. Which lineage of Buddhism? I know that there are multiple lineages. Yeah, but it's through the, I want to say, I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. But what I like is because it's not so focused just on that line of thinking, but it also threads in like the different chapters are organized by the earth body, subtle body, like the koshas in yoga essentially. And so there's a lot of parallels and lineages there too. So this is cool. Somatic stuff. There's practices in here too for physical body, breath body. I thought
Wow.
that was really cool. These are just little meditations for the creative entrepreneur. You are a message. And so they're just little couple liners. Like if you need a little bit of inspiration, This is really helpful to this. So like this is it's clearly for a creative entrepreneur, but talk to your audience as you would talk to your best friend. Be candid, be cool, be loving. And so it's cool little reminders as someone that's like, working with people a lot. So if you're someone that works with people or someone that works in the creative world, you might think that that's cool. The War of Art. That's a good one. Yeah. Again, like creative entrepreneur stuff. But this is like, honestly, in summer, I don't have a lot of creative drive. I think that it's just because we're out in the world talking to people. I'm taking in like all of the stimulation of like the natural world and people and experiences. And I'm like up later. So I'm not up earlier, which is when my creativity is on overdrive, is like in the early hours. And so honestly, I haven't been feeling really inspired creatively. I haven't been writing as much. So now as the temperatures drop, I'm like, it's time. Earlier wake ups, I'm feeling good. But this book has really helped with that. It just talks a little bit about the section that I'm in now talks about resistance and why that resistance is there. And the sorry, that was my phone dropping. The like the root of resistance through the lens of like mental health and self-regulation. And then yeah, just if you wanted the book, The Anatomy Trains. This is myofascial meridian lines book. I'm gonna have some of these visuals in your handout, which unless you're a body worker, that'll probably be more helpful because this is like, kind of a mixture of Latin and Greek because it's mostly anatomical terms. So
it might be a good reference, but it's not required for the training, right?
definitely not.
Perfect.
Yeah, none of these are. These are just personally what I'm reading. And I'm honestly listening to an audiobook on tantric sex specifically.
Yeah,
Because embodiment practices go beyond what we
absolutely.
do on the yoga mat. And it talks
Absolutely.
about time and the construct of time, and it talks about ways that we compartmentalize, right? And like if we're disembodied, like in our from ourselves, then it shows up in other areas, such as intimacy. So
Excellent. So yeah, you'll share the title. What is the title of that book? Do you?
it is The Heart of Tantric Sex by Diana Richardson.
Excellent.
Honestly, the audiobook, I would recommend maybe the book. The narrator, it's like, I'm not a big fan.
I think with
It
that book
makes the
you need.
experience a little weird.
I think with that book you need a good. I don't know. I would hate to have that as my narration assignment. I don't think I'd be good at it.
It's awkward.
All right, we'll put that in the notes. And I want to like buy all those books because I'm like, yes. And it made me want to just put this out there to everyone who's listening and still listening. You will love Giustina's newsletter. It's fantastic. You're an amazing writer. So sign up for it.
Thank you.
And you always say something so insightful and really valuable. So I really appreciate the effort you put into that. And I also am with you on like, creativity is not linear. It's how to ride the waves of productivity, and also knowing that not being productive is such a crucial part of being productive.
Yes.
It's like knowing when and how to turn off. And that's another riddle for our time because it's just we're always so turned on to the external world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this
Thank
chat.
you.
Thank
What a
you.
convo. We've got to have like
Yeah.
monthly just like calls because
No.
this is where we really got into it.
I know. I agree. I totally agree. I can't wait to put this up and
Same.
for everyone to listen. So thank you again for your time, and
Thank you.
we'll see you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.